They said it was just a dog, a stray, unwanted, forgotten. But what if that dog carries secrets older than the town itself? What if he remembered everything they tried to bury? This isn't just a story about loyalty. It's about silence, sacrifice, and a choice that shook the world. The wind rose like a warning, that night scraping its icy fingers against the loose aluminum siding of the train depot. Silas Merrick sat alone in the kitchen of his decaying house, the weak bulb above his table flickering in rhythm with the thunder outside. He sipped black coffee gone cold, the mug chipped at the lip, much like everything else in his life. The house smelled of damp timber, old metal, and the faint bitterness of engine grease. That was how Silas liked it, silent, unbothered, and familiar. He was a man of broad shoulders and narrow words, 42 years old, but aged well beyond his years. His beard was coarse and dark, his skin weathered from decades working trackside in the Colorado sun. A limp in his left leg bore witness to the derailment that had ended his career and claimed his wife in a split second of shattered steel and unforgiving flame. Since then, he'd lived alone, nursing pain with stubbornness, and pretending peace was the same as solitude. The town of Gideon's Rest was a ghost of its former self, tucked beneath the Rockies, like a memory someone forgot to wake up from. The depot had been out of service for years, now its skeletal tracks trailing off into the woods like an unfinished sentence. Some nights Silas swore he could still hear the screech of metal on metal, but he always chalked it up to memory until that night. It began just after 11. The wind had picked up, bringing with it a rain so cold it felt like glass. Silas had been reaching to turn off the lamp when it came a high metallic screech, distant but real, followed by a hollow clang. Not thunder, not imagination. Real. He froze, mug in hand, breath caught. The sound had come from the direction of the tracks, those rusted veins of history that lay still and forgotten behind his house. Pulling on his flannel coat, Silas stepped out into the storm. Rain slapped his face, and the cold gnawed at his joints. The yard was overgrown, weeds curling like claws around rusted metal debris. He moved carefully, favoring his bad leg, and followed the narrow gravel path that led to the edge of the train yard. The light from his flashlight bounced erratically over rail ties and shattered bottles. Then he saw it, two golden orbs reflecting the beam back at him. Eyes. Unblinking, steady, and too high from the ground to be a raccoon. The creature stood still between two rails. As Silas stepped closer, shapes sharpened. It was a dog, a large, broad-shouldered golden retriever, soaked through fur clinging to its ribs, eyes fixed directly on him. The dog didn't bark. It didn't move. It simply watched as if expecting him. Silas took a step forward, and the dog took one. Back, its movement almost ceremonial, as though drawing him onward or away from something. And then it turned, padded once toward the abandoned platform, and vanished into the shadows. For a long moment Silas stood frozen, his breath loud in his ears, the rain now cascading from the brim of his cap. He had no idea where the dog had come from. No collar, no sign of ownership, no explanation. But there was something in its gaze. Not fear, not confusion. Something older, something deliberate. The next morning, gossip hummed through town like static. At Finley's diner, the usual crowd murmured over burnt coffee and eggs gone cold. They spoke of flickering lights near the tracks of shadows pacing the hills. Deputy Joel Finch sat at the counter pretending not to listen. Joel was in his mid-30s with a trimmed beard and eyes the color of tired fog. He was tall and wiry, always wearing the same weathered sheriff's jacket inherited from the man before him. He had only been made acting deputy after the sheriff retired early from a heart attack 2 years back. Joel wasn't the loud type. He had a slow, methodical way of speaking, which made people trust him. But there was a quiet sadness in him. His younger sister Naomi had vanished 6 years ago, after a high school party near the old rail yard. No witnesses, no leads, just an open case that no one had the stomach to close. Since then, Joel had made the train yard his private obsession, masked under professionalism and protocol. When Silas walked into the diner, an event rare enough to turn heads, Joel immediately straightened. "You look like hell," Joel said, offering a nod. "You hear it too last night." Silas didn't sit. "Something's out there," he said simply. Not a sound, a presence. Joel's brow furrowed. What kind of presence? Silas hesitated. A dog, big one, golden, not local, didn't bark, didn't run. Joel's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. "Show me where." They walked back to the tracks together that afternoon. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still soft. Silas led Joel to the exact spot. Sure enough, paw prints remained deep ones, wide-spaced, heavier than usual. Joel crouched and ran his fingers over the indentations. He frowned. "That's not just any stray," he muttered. Silas crossed his arms. "I didn't think so either." Joel glanced up. "You know, we used to get reports of a dog just like this one. People seeing it during storms, always near the depot, never twice from the same person." Silas looked at him. Like a ghost story, Joel stood. Like something people want to forget. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, a chill crept back into the air. Silas lingered at the tracks after Joel left his mind replaying the dog's eyes. There was something there, memory, maybe even intention. He didn't believe in hauntings, but he knew when something wasn't right. He'd spent his life around steel and steam and men who lied for a living. That dog wasn't random, and then he saw it again. At the far end of the yard near the shadow of the old signal tower, a figure moved low and steady, golden fur glinting under the fading light. Silas took a step forward, but the dog didn't wait. It turned, gave a single fleeting look over its shoulder, and disappeared into the thickets behind the rails. Silas stood there long after the shadows deepened. The depot loomed behind him like a forgotten cathedral, and somewhere beneath his feet, rusted rails whispered stories long buried. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew something had begun. Not with thunder, not with blood, but with silence and eyes that did not look away. Abby Linwood was the kind of girl who noticed things others didn't. At just 9 years old, she had the gaze of someone twice her age, quiet, perceptive, and slightly haunted. She had a small, heart-shaped face with deep brown eyes and curly black hair that always seemed to be escaping the knit beanie her aunt insisted she wear. She walked with a cautious gait, the kind born from growing up too fast, too aware of how fragile adults really were. Her mother had disappeared when Abby was still in diapers, and her father a drifter with no fixed address, sent postcards but no return address. She now lived with her great-aunt Meredith, a once lively woman in her early 60s who had lost mobility in both legs after a fall 2 years ago. Meredith, with her thin frame and permed silver curls, was sharp-tongued but kind-hearted, never cruel, just worn out by the world, and the weight of raising a child in a town that had long since forgotten how to dream. Their house sat just 2 blocks from the abandoned train depot, close enough that at night, the rattle of wind through old signal wires sometimes slipped through Abby's cracked bedroom window, like voices arguing in another room. She didn't mind it. In fact, she found it comforting, like the station was still trying to remember who it once was. On the morning after the storm, Abby was walking home from school alone as usual when she noticed something strange behind the old maintenance shed near the tracks. A piece of fabric tattered and soaked from the night before fluttered beneath a bush. Curious, she knelt and tugged at it. It wasn't just cloth, it was the corner of a leather-bound notebook swollen from moisture, its edges darkened with time. She pulled it free, wiped off the mud, and tucked it beneath her coat before anyone could see. At home, she waited until Aunt Meredith dozed off in her chair, the afternoon soap opera murmuring in the background. Abby tiptoed into her room, shut the door, and laid the notebook on her desk. The pages crackled when she opened it. Inside were hand-drawn maps of the train yard, scribbled dates and names, some she recognized from town, others long forgotten. But what caught her attention most were the headings Storm Night March 1994, Samuel T., last seen near Tunnel 3rd. July 2003, Lizzie R., vanished near Signal Tower, August 2009, Jamie Wells, lost during track cleanup. Every entry had the same patterned storm nightfall last seen near the station, dozens of them, all before she was born. Abby's fingers trembled slightly as she flipped to the last page. A line scrawled in shaky ink read, "They don't hear it like we do. The tracks remember." She didn't know what it meant, but something in her chest tightened. That night she dreamt of rain. In her dream a child stood frozen on the tracks, eyes wide with terror as a rumble grew louder in the distance. Then came the dog, a golden retriever with soaked fur, its eyes luminous and calm. It darted forward, grabbed the child's jacket in its teeth, and yanked them off the rails just as a train surged past. But there was no blood, no scream, only silence and the flash of golden fur vanishing into the fog. The next morning, Abby pulled out her sketch pad and began to draw. She didn't usually remember dreams in such detail, but this one had clung to her like a scent she couldn't shake. The image flowed from her fingers, the tracks, the storm, the child's face, and the dog's eyes wise, ancient, sad. When she finished, she stared at it for a long time, unsure whether she had drawn it or simply uncovered it. That afternoon, Meredith noticed the drawing and frowned. "Where'd you see that dog?" she asked, adjusting her reading glasses. "I didn't," Abby replied. "I dreamed it." Her aunt's lips thinned. "Well, that looks a lot like the Harper family's old dog. They had a retriever just like that back in the 90s. Disappeared same night their little boy did." Abby's heart skipped. "You knew someone who went missing." Meredith hesitated. "We all knew someone, but folks don't talk about that. It's just bad luck, that's all." But Abby didn't believe in bad luck. That night after Meredith had gone to sleep, she pulled the leather notebook from under her bed and began copying the names into her sketch pad one by one, alongside quick pencil sketches of how she imagined them. And with each name came a feeling like someone whispering across time. The next day at school, Abby sat alone in the corner of the library sketching again. A boy named Danny Ellis, a few years older than her, noticed and leaned over. Danny was a freckle-faced troublemaker, with a fondness for chewing on pencil erasers and mimicking the teachers behind their backs. "That's pretty cool," he said, pointing to the drawing of the dog. "Looks like the one by the tracks." Abby looked up. "You've seen it?" He shrugged. "Yeah, twice. Last week and the night of the storm. Just stood there watching like it was guarding something." Abby leaned in. "Where?" "By the old switching shed," he said, lowering his voice. "Don't tell anyone I told you. My dad says people who see it start acting weird." After school, Abby rushed home, grabbed her coat and flashlight, and snuck out before Meredith could stop her. She made her way to the switching shed, an old rust-stained structure near the far end of the depot. The door was rusted shut, but the window was cracked. Inside, she saw nothing but broken crates and a blanket of dust. Yet, as she turned to leave, something shimmered in the gravel. A tag. Half buried, she pulled it free. Brass. Worn. It read only Hawthorne. She clutched it in her hand and looked around, but no one was there. The wind picked up, and for a brief moment it sounded like a whisper threading through the rails. She didn't know what Hawthorne meant, but something inside her told her the dog in her dream wasn't just a dream. He was real, and maybe he was still trying to save someone. Deputy Joel Finch stood beside the stalled freight train, staring at the frozen gravel beneath his boots. A line of boxcars stretched like rusted vertebrae through the pine-shadowed landscape. The night before, the train had slammed to an emergency stop just outside Gideon's Rest, when the conductor claimed a large animal had bolted across the tracks, triggering the sensors. Joel had come alone to investigate. He preferred it that way. Backup from the county took too long, and the local force consisted of 2 part-timers who mostly handled noise complaints and parking disputes. Joel crouched beside the motionless rail and brushed away a layer of brittle pine needles and frost. There in the dirt were prints deep, clear, purposeful. He pressed a gloved hand next to them for comparison. The paws were large, broader than most breeds he'd seen in the area. Not wolf, not coyote, dog, a big one. The same print Silas had shown him days ago, only now they crossed onto federal railway ground. He stood the cold biting his ears, despite the thick collar of his coat. The name stitched into the shoulder read, Finch, though the letters were faded from years of wear. He was 35, lean and pale, with sandy blonde hair cut short and a long scar that ran just beneath his right ear, mostly hidden unless he turned his head. He'd gotten it in Montana during a domestic dispute, gone sideways, his first real case out of academy. It hadn't made him cynical, just quiet. Joel had grown up in this town, known its secrets, its silences, and, more importantly, its tendency to bury uncomfortable truths. When he returned to the spot where the conductor had seen the dog, Joel scanned the tree line and saw nothing but fog rising between the trees. But something caught his eye, a dull glint in the underbrush. He stepped over a collapsed fence and parted the branches. Lying in the dead leaves was a rusted metal collar caked with dirt, its buckle bent. He wiped it with his thumb. The nameplate was scratched, but legible Hawthorne. Back at the station, Joel logged the collar under unidentified canine and uploaded a copy of the print photos to the internal report system. Minutes later, his phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. He answered with a flat Finch. The voice on the other end was male-clipped and emotionless. "You're advised not to pursue this lead. Close the report under wildlife misidentification. No further action required. The line went dead. Joel stared at the phone. No badge number, no ID, just authority without a face. He leaned back in his chair and glanced at the printed image of the collar beside the report. Hawthorne, that name again. Abby had mentioned it. Silas had seen it on a dog. And now it had stopped a train. If it was just a stray, someone was very invested in keeping it invisible. That night, Joel stopped by Silas Merrick's place. The older man answered the door with his usual unreadable expression, flannel sleeves rolled to the elbows, despite the chill. "You hear about the train?" Joel asked. Silas nodded once. "Figured it'd get your attention." Joel stepped inside without being invited. Their rapport wasn't warm, but it was built on mutual respect, the kind men form when they've both seen too much and said too little. "I found this." Joel laid the collar on the kitchen table. Silas picked it up, slowly turned it in his calloused hands, then looked at Joel. "This isn't new," Silas said. "This has been buried a while." Joel nodded. "Which doesn't make sense unless that dog's not just some stray Silas finished." Joel hesitated. "I saw this dog before." Silas raised an eyebrow. 15 years ago. Fire season was rough. There was that blaze near Mount Kepler. You were there, weren't you? Silas's jaw tensed. "I was." "There was a shelter evacuation," Joel continued. "I was just a rookie. But I remember they said a rescue dog got trapped trying to pull a child from the building." "They said it died," Silas said flatly. "I think it didn't." Silas went to the cupboard and retrieved an old tin box. Inside were photos, some scorched at the edges. He pulled one free. It showed a younger Silas, dirt-streaked and thinner, kneeling beside a smiling boy, wrapped in an emergency blanket. And next to them, a golden retriever, soaked eyes, bright, unmistakable. This was after we pulled the last kid, Silas said. That dog didn't bark once, just worked, saved 3 children before the beam came down. We never found its body. Joel studied the photo, then the collar. If that's the same dog, it should be dead. Silas didn't answer. Instead, he poured 2 glasses of bourbon and slid one across the table. Joel didn't drink on duty, but he took it anyway. They sat in silence, the collar between them, like a forgotten oath. Meanwhile, across town, Abby Linwood was curled on the floor of her room, sketchpad open, her fingers smudged with charcoal. She had drawn the same dog again, this time in motion, leaping through smoke, pulling a child by the collar of their jacket. The image had come to her in flashes throughout the day, as if someone had whispered it into her mind. She flipped the page and began anew, drawing a train. But not just any train. It was the freight line that ran behind the depot. On the gravel beside it, the dog stood still, golden fur shining beneath flickering lights. A knock came at her bedroom door. "Abby, dinner," Aunt Meredith called. "I'm not hungry." Meredith entered anyway, her walker squeaking. "You've been quiet all day." Drawing again, Abby nodded. Meredith sighed and sat on the edge of the bed. "You've always been tuned in, like your mother." Abby looked up. Did Mom ever see things? Meredith's eyes clouded. She used to say the tracks were never empty, that they carried echoes. I didn't believe her. She paused, her gaze drifting to the sketchpad. But now I'm not so sure. That night, Joel filed a separate report, one not uploaded to the department system. He locked the collar in his personal evidence box and labeled it simply "Recovered Hawthorne. Origin unknown." Somewhere in the forest beyond the tracks, wind stirred the leaves, and under a flicker of moonlight, a pair of golden eyes blinked once and vanished. It was just past sunset when Abby Linwood showed up unannounced at Silas Merrick's porch, clutching her sketchpad like a shield. She had never spoken to him before, never even dared to step beyond the cracked sidewalk that separated her part of town from his. But the tag in her pocket and the sketches in her hand gave her a strange kind of courage. Silas had just returned from the freight yard when he saw her standing under the broken porch, light-soaked curls plastered to her cheeks, small shoulders squared, like she was about to knock on the door of a ghost. "You're Silas Merrick, right?" she asked, her voice high but certain. "The man who saw the dog." He blinked, narrowing his eyes. "And who told you that?" "No one." "I've seen him too," she said. "And I think he wants us to follow." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he noticed the brass tag dangling from her mittened hand and the sketch pad tucked under her arm. She opened it without being asked, revealing a drawing, a charcoal image of a golden dog pulling a child from smoke. It was the same face Silas had seen in his memories, in the fire in the dark. She reached out and handed him the brass tag. "I found this near the switching shed." Silas turned the tag in his calloused fingers. Hawthorne worn but clear. He looked back at the girl. Her eyes were serious-wide and filled with something he hadn't seen in years: faith. Not in adults or in safety, but in a connection older than either. "You better come in," he said. An hour later, under a sky pulled tight with stars, they were at the edge of the abandoned depot, following a trail of paw prints. The prints led them behind a line of rusted shipping containers and into a collapsed vent shaft barely large enough for a grown man to fit through. Silas pulled out a crowbar from his truck and levered the grate loose with a grunt. Abby wriggled in the first boot, scraping the tunnel floor, Silas close behind, with a flashlight in one hand and a pry bar in the other. The air beneath the depot was cold, unnaturally so. The tunnel was concrete-lined, reinforced with steel ribs that groaned faintly under their weight. Water dripped from the ceiling in rhythmic taps. Graffiti-lined parts of the walls, mostly tags and initials, but some were symbols, circles intersecting strange runes, patterns too precise to be random. Abby whispered, "I think kids used to come down here." Maybe Silas said, scanning the floor. But this wasn't built by kids. The tunnel widened into a low chamber, just tall enough for Silas to stand fully upright. The room was filled with old furniture, metal chairs, a folding table, lockers with missing doors. Against one wall were pinned photographs, dozens of Polaroids, most curled from moisture and time. Abby reached for the nearest one. A boy sat in a hospital gown, legs swinging, hands folded in his lap. He looked scared, or maybe just tired. Beside him, lying quietly, was a golden-furred dog. Not a puppy, not old either. Alert eyes, floppy ears, calm posture. Abby gasped. "That's him." Silas stepped closer. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I draw that same face almost every night, even before I knew his name." There were more photos, children of various ages, some interacting with dogs, some holding clipboards, one even wearing a lab coat too big for his frame. The dogs varied, but one figure repeated more often than others: the golden retriever. In some images, the dog was working. In others, resting beside children. In one, it was wearing a harness marked H7. A whiteboard hung in the far corner, faded marker still legible, test logs, Tier 2, behavior, recognition, ORG, field response, emergency simulations. Silas ran a hand over the text, his face hardening. This wasn't a hideout, he said. It was a lab. They explored deeper into the chamber. Abby found a low locker beneath a bench and pulled it open with both hands. Inside were notebooks wrapped in zippered plastic, a few files, a small cassette recorder with a cracked button. She handed one notebook to Silas. He flipped through its yellowing pages. Subject H7 displays repeated signs of unsolicited protective behavior. Test 14B terminated early after dog intercepted untrained child during simulated emergency. No aggression, but uncommanded action observed. Abby leaned in, reading. They didn't like that he acted on his own. They wanted obedience. He gave them judgment. Another note read, "Subject nearing threshold. Emotional imprint strong. Possible bond with unauthorized personnel. Recommend evaluation or decommission." Abby looked at him. "Decommission means kill, doesn't it?" Silas didn't answer. Just then, a soft shuffle echoed behind them. Both froze. Silas raised the flashlight. At the far end of the room, between two concrete support pillars, stood Hawthorne. He was older now, his coat dusted with dirt, an age-one rear leg bearing weight awkwardly. His eyes shone gold in the light. Not frightened, not surprised, just watchful. The same quiet authority as the day Silas saw him on the tracks. He padded slowly into the room and sat by the wall of photos as if he'd known they would come. Abby stepped forward without hesitation. "You brought us here," she said. Why Hawthorne didn't respond. Instead, he turned his head toward the far side of the chamber, where a door partially hidden behind a stack of crates sat ajar. Silas pushed it open, revealing a narrower hallway. Inside was a cot, blankets, empty food containers, and an old lantern. Someone had lived here recently. Abby spotted a plastic bracelet on the floor, a hospital band scuffed and discolored. She picked it up and read the name. Naomi Finch. Silas met her eyes. Joel's sister. The tunnel groaned like something ancient waking in its sleep. Abby Linwood moved slowly, her boots scraping against the uneven concrete floor. The plastic hospital band bearing the name Naomi Finch still gripped tightly in her hand. Silas walked ahead, his flashlight beam cutting through the dense dark like a blade, his face carved from tension and disbelief. Behind them, Hawthorne followed silently, paws soft against the dust, his gait marked by a faint limp that only added to the grave dignity in the way he moved. His coat was duller now than it had been in the photos streaked with mud and age, but there was no mistaking the dog's presence, calm, alert, unyielding. They had just exited the side chamber, where they found evidence of someone living, perhaps hiding beneath the depot, when Abby noticed a narrow stairwell descending sharply to their right. It had no railing, only crumbling stone steps slick with moss and water. Without thinking, she moved toward it, curiosity overpowering caution. "Wait," Silas called behind her, but too late her foot caught on a jagged lip of broken concrete, and her body pitched forward. The air was torn by silence, no scream, just the rush of falling. Then movement. Hawthorne lunged with surprising speed for a dog his age. He closed the distance in 2 bounds and grabbed the edge of Abby's parka with his teeth, his legs anchoring on the floor above. Abby dangled for a moment, caught in the balance between gravity and teeth. Her heart thundered in her ears. Silas reached down and grabbed her by the arms, hauling her back to safety as Hawthorne released his grip. Abby collapsed into Silas's chest, trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. I thought I saw—" "You almost saw the bottom of that stairwell," he muttered gruffly. "Next time, wait." Hawthorne sat beside them, panting slightly, tail motionless. He didn't whimper, he didn't bark, but his eyes met Abby's steady and watchful. Gratitude flowed between them like breath. When they continued forward, they took another route through a secondary corridor that curved back toward the surface. It led them to a rusted iron hatch sealed with a latch that hadn't been moved in years. Silas and Abby pushed against it together, metal groaning in protest. Finally, it gave way, revealing the base of an old train car partially buried under soil and weeds, one of the oldest on the property, sealed off since the days of Elios transport. Inside, the air was stale and lined with the scent of mildew and long-dead machinery. A layer of dust coated the floor, disturbed only by the fresh trail of paw prints. Hawthorne was already ahead of them, moving with uncanny purpose. At the far end of the car stood a wooden crate, weather-worn but intact, its top sealed by iron latches. Etched into the side, just barely legible, were faded letters, Gold Heart Tier 3, Behavioral K9 Unit. Silas let out a slow breath. This is what they were hiding. Abby stepped closer and brushed dust from the lid. "Can we open it?" Silas nodded, and together they undid the latches. The top creaked open to reveal not weapons or tools, but folders, hundreds of them, sealed in thick plastic labeled with military-grade identifiers. Subject IDs, handler logs, behavior modification outlines. One folder had a red tag, H7 Observed Deviation, Active Protective Override. Beneath that were handwritten evaluations from someone named Dr. M.P., a woman who had signed multiple entries with meticulous penmanship. One read, H7 demonstrates unusually high loyalty toward non-assigned civilians, particularly children. Subject refuses de-escalation commands if perceived threat remains present. Possible emotional bleed-over from prior field trauma. Recommend isolation pending further study. Abby whispered. They couldn't control him. They didn't want loyalty. They wanted obedience, Silas said bitterly. Before he could say more, a noise from outside the car made them freeze, not a natural sound. Boots on gravel. Silas peered through a crack in the car's rusted siding. Across the clearing stood a woman, mid-50s tall, with a long, narrow frame, and shoulders squared from military posture. Her silver blonde hair was tied in a severe knot at the base of her neck, and her trench coat, forest green and clean, despite the muddy surroundings, swept around her like she had never once fallen. She stood still as if waiting to be noticed. Abby gasped. "I've seen her." Silas narrowed his eyes. "How? In a dream," she whispered. Or maybe it was a memory. The woman stepped forward. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice was level-cultured but worn down by years of restraint. She didn't raise her hands or show a weapon. "But since you are, I assume you've seen him." Silas opened the train door. You mean Hawthorne? The woman didn't smile. I mean H7. She stepped closer. I'm not here to stop you. I'm here because I need to see him one more time. Abby's voice was sharp. Who are you? The woman exhaled. Dr. Marla Penrose. I was the lead behavioral analyst for Tier 3. I trained the dog you call Hawthorne. She looked at Hawthorne, then her expression caught between reverence and regret. He wasn't supposed to survive, but he chose differently. Silas stepped between her and Abby. You knew he was out here, I suspected, she replied. After the program collapsed, I ran. I leaked what I could, but most of it was buried. When I heard about the train incident, I knew he was still active. Abby asked, Why did you train him like that? I didn't, Marla said. I trained him to follow commands. He taught himself how to disobey, and that was his greatest strength. She knelt slowly, holding out her hand. Hawthorne approached her cautiously. No growl, no wag, just quiet recognition. He touched his nose to her palm, and she closed her eyes. I'm sorry, she said. You were more human than any of us. Silas turned to her. Why are you really here? Marla stood. Because if you found this car, others will too. They're looking for him, and they won't come to apologize. The town of Gideon's Rest had always known how to keep quiet. Whispers here didn't carry far, and trouble when it came tended to vanish beneath the brush. But that silence changed the morning Sheriff Wallace Bray was relocated without warning. Officially, it was a departmental reassignment. Unofficially, no one saw it coming, not even Bray himself. A stocky man in his 60s with thick white eyebrows and a voice like gravel, Bray had been sheriff for over 2 decades. He had served with fairness, leaning more on reason than rule. When Joel Finch entered the department that morning, to find Bray's office-locked blinds drawn and a strange vehicle parked in his spot, he knew something was wrong. The new man at the desk wore a badge clipped to a matte black windbreaker, but it had no county name. His build was medium unremarkable with pale skin, close-cropped dark hair, and mirrored glasses that didn't come off even indoors. He introduced himself simply as Agent Levin. His handshake was cold, his tone colder. You're being reassigned to civilian liaison duties effective immediately, he told Joel without preamble. All canine-related investigations are now under federal jurisdiction. Joel didn't argue. He nodded, stepped outside, and called Silas. By late afternoon, Silas's home had become a makeshift command center. The house itself was small and creaked with age, its floorboards softened from decades of mountain weather, but its walls had grown thick with purpose. Joel sat at the kitchen table reviewing the audio equipment he had pulled from the evidence locker. Beside him, Dr. Marla Penrose scanned the files they had retrieved from the freight car, her long fingers moving quickly over redacted lines and symbols. Abby dozed quietly in the armchair by the window, Hawthorne curled at her feet, his head resting on her boot. The dog looked older now than he had just days ago. His breathing was slower, his right rear leg stiff and trembling, with even the smallest movement. His eyes, though still sharp, held a glaze of pain beneath the calm. Marla noticed kneeling beside him with a gentle touch. He's deteriorating faster than I expected, she murmured. Silas crossed his arms. From the leg, Marla shook her head. Partly, but also from what was done to him. The Goldheart Initiative wasn't just obedience training. They altered neurology, selective hormone response, accelerated learning, emotional imprinting. They didn't just want smarter dogs, they wanted creatures that could evaluate moral action in real time. Joel looked up from the table. You're saying they engineered empathy? Marla's voice lowered. And Hawthorne exceeded every metric. He formed bonds no handler could sever. His instincts were his own. They saw it as failure. I saw it as a miracle. Before anyone could respond, headlights flashed through the window. 2 black SUVs turning up the gravel path, kicking dust and pine needles behind them. Silas didn't flinch. Showtime, he said, nodding toward Joel, who hit record on the audio unit hidden beneath the table. The vehicles came to a stop, and 3 figures emerged. All wore tactical gear, black jackets, black boots, earpieces but no insignia. The lead was a tall man, with a gaunt face, clean-shaven, and eyes like wet ash. His name, if he ever offered one, was not important. He knocked only once before letting himself in. We have reason to believe you're harboring federal property, he said flatly. Silas stepped forward. Property doesn't bleed. The man ignored him. Where's the animal? Marla stood. He has a name. The man's eyes flicked to her. Dr. Penrose. "We've been looking for you." "I'm sure you have," she replied, "but you're a few years too late." He turned his attention back to Silas. "You are ordered to surrender the dog for immediate transfer. Refusal will be interpreted as obstruction." Joel stepped in. "Under what statute?" "No comment," the agent replied. Silas didn't move. "You're not law enforcement. We don't answer to your law." Silas gestured toward the kitchen. "Then maybe you'd like to tell your story for the record." The agent's eyes narrowed. "What record?" Marla stepped aside, revealing the blinking red light on the audio recorder, now resting on the counter. The agent froze. "Your voice is being transmitted to 3 secure cloud servers as we speak," Joel said calmly. "You've already admitted to attempting seizure of private property without warrant or ID." The agent's jaw ticked, then motioned for his men to retreat. "This isn't over," he said as they backed toward the door. "No," Marla said softly. "It's just beginning." The SUVs pulled away into the trees without sirens, without warning, vanishing into the dusk. Hours later, Hawthorne lay beside the fireplace, eyes half closed, his breath shallow. Abby sat beside him, humming softly as she drew another sketch, this one of the 3 agents fading into the woods, Hawthorne watching them go. Marla placed a gentle hand on Silas's shoulder. "He doesn't have much time." Silas's voice cracked for the first time in days. "We can't lose him. Not now." Joel stood by the window, watching the darkness thicken. "Then we'd better make sure the world knows exactly who he was before they try to erase him again." The first upload went live at 5:43 a.m. The video was raw and unpolished shot on an old phone from the corner of Silas Merrick's porch. In the frame, the camera shook as a young girl, Abby Linwood, slipped on the edge of a crumbling stairwell. The footage captured her silent fall, the flash of golden fur leaping after her, and the moment Hawthorne grabbed the back of her coat with his jaws pulling her back from the abyss. There was no dramatic music, no narration, just the natural sound of Abby's gasp, Hawthorne's soft grunt, and the stunned silence that followed. By noon, the video had crossed 200,000 views. By nightfall, nearly 4 million. Headlines emerged in quick succession. Golden Retriever saves child from hidden military bunker. Is this the dog the government wants to erase? Erbt, let Hawthorne live. The pressure mounted fast. Civil rights organizations called for transparency. Animal advocacy groups demanded protection. News trucks began circling the edge of Gideon's Rest, kicked back from town by locals, but eager to catch anything they could. In front of it all, Deputy Joel Finch sat at his desk, with dark circles under his eyes, exhaustion wrapped around his shoulders like lead. He was 35, lean with streaks of gray now starting to show along his temples. Days without sleep had dulled the edges of his once orderly mind, but not the purpose burning underneath. That morning, he'd retrieved a court-sealed file from a contact in Denver, an off-the-record DNA request he had submitted days earlier. He now held the results in his hand, sealed in a pale blue envelope. Across the room, Dr. Marla Penrose was reviewing the 3rd wave of Goldheart files. Her posture, once military straight, was now slumped forward, reading glasses slipping down her nose. The lines around her eyes had deepened in just a few days. "You look like you've read too much and slept too little," Joel said. Marla offered a thin smile. "You're not wrong." He handed her the envelope. "I think you should be the one to open it." She peeled it open carefully, pulling out a single sheet. Her eyes moved left to right, then widened slightly. "It's a match," Abby Joel asked. Marla nodded. Her mitochondrial DNA links directly to subject child 12B in the Elios subtier cognitive group. There's a notation maternal ID coded as Elin Linwood. Joel frowned. That was her mother? Not just her mother, Marla said. She was part of the behavioral monitoring team at the lab, transferred in under temporary credentials 2 years before the program folded. She vanished from the registry shortly before the lab was shut down. Joel looked out the window where Abby sat in the yard, drawing beside Hawthorne, who rested in the grass motionless but alert. So, all this time, he wasn't just protecting anyone. He was assigned to her. Or he chose her, Marla added. That distinction sat heavy in the air. That afternoon, as a soft rain began to fall over the foothills, Silas, Joel, and Marla met in the garage to finalize the plan. Hawthorne lay on an old blanket in the corner, his breathing shallow, the wound in his rear leg worsening. Abby stood nearby, arms crossed tightly, refusing to leave his side. Silas, now fully drawn into the storm he'd tried to avoid for years, took charge of the setup. "We bring them here, make them think we're complying," he said, drawing on the whiteboard they had mounted against the tool racks. "Marla, you confirm transfer protocol. Joel, you activate the final upload if things go south." Abby looked up. What if they try to hurt him? Joel met her gaze. They won't. Not with the world watching. But even as they plan something darker, move beyond the borders of town. At 3:16 a.m., under heavy cloud cover, 3 unmarked transport vehicles crossed into the outskirts of Gideon's Rest. They bore no license plates, only gray paint and government-grade silence. Inside, each a team of 4 men sat in full tactical gear earpieces, buzzing with encrypted radio chatter, gloved fingers twitching near triggers. The leader of the team, a man named Rourke, was in his 40s, with angular features, sun-damaged skin, and the deadpan voice of someone who'd long since buried his conscience beneath layers of order. He reviewed the mission, brief primary retrieval of Subject H7, secondary recovery of all related data, tertiary containment of civilian interference, non-compliance clearance authorized. Rourke didn't hesitate. He never did. By 3:43 a.m., they reached the edge of Silas's property. The house was dark quiet. Too quiet. Rourke gave the hand signal. 2 men circled left. One cut power to the breaker box. Another breached the back porch. But what they didn't see, what they never expected, was the camera mounted beneath the eaves already transmitting live to over 400,000 viewers. Joel had activated the feed minutes before the first vehicle arrived. Inside, the group waited. Hawthorne lay in the center of the living room, Abby curled beside him, her hand resting over his heart. Marla stood near the kitchen tablet in hand. Joel had his badge out, not that it would matter, and Silas stood with a shotgun not loaded, but visible. The front door opened slowly. Rourke entered, flanked by 2 men. "You're outnumbered," he said calmly. Joel replied, "So were the Spartans." Rourke took a step forward. "I'm authorized to retrieve federal property." Marla raised her tablet, displaying a live feed of the agents entering the house. "And I'm authorized to make you famous." He hesitated. "You so much as touch that dog," she continued, "and you'll be on every screen in the world by morning." Rourke's fingers twitched. His men tensed. Then Hawthorne lifted his head. It was weak trembling, but deliberate. He locked eyes with Rourke. His body didn't move, but the message was clear. "I remember you." And for the first time in years, Rourke faltered. Then from the shadows near the back hallway, Abby's voice rang out. "You can't take him. He's already done everything you couldn't." Her words cut sharper than any order. Rourke stepped back. He turned. "Pull out." The men hesitated, then followed. No shots, no threats, just retreat. When the last vehicle vanished into the trees, Joel slumped against the door. "We won." "No," Silas said softly. He did. They all looked at Hawthorne, now lying still once more, eyes closed, breath shallow, but peaceful. Abby leaned over and whispered, "You did it. You're free." It was a morning stitched from stillness. The pines swayed gently above Gideon's Rest branches, sighing like old friends exhaling a secret. Fog curled low over the train yard, clinging to rusted rails and forgotten boxcars, while the first golden light of dawn pressed softly through the trees. In the center of it all, beneath the massive roots of a pine that had stood longer than the town itself, lay a small, unmarked mound of earth. The grass around it had not yet grown back. The soil was dark and fresh and still. Abby Linwood sat cross-legged beside it, arms wrapped around her knees, her chin resting on denim. Her eyes, once filled with childish curiosity, now held the weight of something earned too early grief, not sharp, but deep, like the hush that follows thunder. In her hands she held a brass collar tag, worn smooth by time. It read simply, Hawthorne. He had died quietly in the night, his head resting in her lap, his final breath as soft as a sigh. No pain, no fear, just stillness like he had, finally after all this time, chosen to rest. The day after his passing, Silas Merrick had taken a plank from the old switching shed and carved a plaque by hand. His fingers rough from years of repair work, and solitude moved with more care than they ever had before. Marla supplied the words, Joel lent the varnish, and Abby chose the place. Together they knelt beneath the tree and drove the plaque into the ground. It read, "He didn't bark. He didn't run. He waited. And he chose." The townsfolk came in quiet waves, most of them unsure what had happened, only that it mattered. They left flowers, pieces of ribbon, even dog treats beside the tree. A little girl named Tessa, no older than 6, brought a drawing of Hawthorne with angel wings. He was magic, she told Abby. That's why he didn't stay. Dr. Marla Penrose didn't cry at the burial. She simply stood still, hands folded before her eyes, wet but unblinking. She wore her old lab coat for the first time in years, the one with her name stitched in faded thread, not as a symbol of pride, but of repentance. That afternoon, she drove to the nearest news station and handed over every classified file, every image, every test result she had preserved from Goldheart. She gave names, dates, funding sources, everything. When the anchors asked why, now she replied, "Because a dog did what 100 men could not." He remembered what it meant to choose kindness. Within days, protests erupted across 3 states. Investigations reopened. Elios transport was dragged back into the light, and Congress was forced to issue statements. Not all justice came, but enough cracks formed to let truth shine through. Marla later received a formal subpoena, and she faced it willingly. Meanwhile, Silas had begun clearing out a spare room in his home. He fixed the window, restained the floorboards, and built a small bookshelf shaped like a tree. When the paperwork finally came through, he became Abby's legal guardian. He didn't ask her to call him anything special, but she began calling him Pops one morning at breakfast, without preamble or explanation. He didn't correct her. Joel Finch, for his part, wore a new badge now. After Sheriff Bray's resignation, quiet and graceful, Joel was promoted, voted in by an overwhelming margin. He brought the station back to life, restaffed it with people who still believed in listening first, and left a small frame photo of Hawthorne on his desk, right beside one of his sister Naomi, who had since reached out and begun slowly rebuilding a life once erased. Abby still drew daily. The pages were quieter now, less fear, more light. Dogs with wings, children in meadows, a train that never crashed, only waited. But one image returned, often a golden dog lying beneath a pine tree beside a boy with curly hair and a blue flannel shirt. The boy never aged. His smile was calm, and his hand rested on the dog's neck. The boy's name was Caleb. She had seen him once in a dream the night after Hawthorne passed. They had been under the tree together, the air warm and heavy with pine. Caleb had looked at her, not with sadness, but with pride, and Hawthorne had lifted his head and wagged his tail just once before returning to sleep. In that dream, no one spoke. They didn't need to. Abby woke up with her pillow damp and the sun streaming through her window. She smiled, not because she was happy, but because she was whole. Weeks passed. The world moved on as it always did. But in Gideon's Rest, the train still didn't run past the yard. Birds still sang low over the tracks, and children whispered stories of a ghost dog who guarded dreams. And every Saturday, Abby and Silas brought fresh flowers to the plaque beneath the pines. They never stayed long. Hawthorne had waited long enough. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they come on 4 tired legs with quiet eyes and a heart that never gives up. Hawthorne wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that God often works through the silent, the small, and the overlooked. In a world that forgets, he remembered. In a world that runs, he waited. And in doing so, he became the answer to a prayer no one dared speak aloud. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below with one word, Amen. Share it with someone who needs hope. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story of faith, love, and redemption. May God bless you and everyone who carries kindness in their soul.